Mensa sunglasses from our people running around handing them out. All of a sudden the hands go up. My name is Lorraine Bakering, and I am the chair of American Mensa. We are the largest national Mensa. There is Mensa International, which is the international organization, and there are Mensas in at least 40 different countries, and we are the largest. I'm very happy to be here because I'm getting to combine three of my loves: Comic-Con, science fiction, and Mensa. So I'm happy to share that with you. A little bit about me. As you can tell, I'm into World of Warcraft. This is World Mensa. I am Alliance, not Horde, and I am Star Trek, not Star Wars. So we'll just get over that. Mensa is a high IQ society. It is a social club for those with high intelligence, those who qualify in the top 2% of standardized tests. We have a number of different tests that we accept, over 200. And just for Comic-Con, we have a special. So if you want to be able to take the Mensa test at half off, which is $30 instead of $60, you can use the code SDCC50. So when you go on to the us.mensa.org/testing, and then you can sign up and take the test and join and become one of our tribe. Because I feel like Comic-Con is part of our tribe. What I would like to do now is allow our guests to introduce themselves, and we're going to start here with Doug.
My name is Doug. I'm a criminal defense attorney and also a member of Mensa. My hobby is stamp comedy and writing. I publish sci-fi books under the name Doug X, the letter X, and stamp comedy, dougxcomedy.com, because I want to get a little bit of my soul back from doing criminal defense.
You don't have to do anything, just talk.
Oh. My name is Ian Randall Strock. I'm the Northeast Regional Vice Chairman of American Mensa. And I'm also a writer and an editor. So I think of myself as a science fiction writer, even though 98% of my published words have been nonfiction. I've got stories in the recent issue of Nature, some anthologies. But as an editor and publisher, I am the owner of Fantastic Books. See us online at fantasticbooks.biz, and thus I am the publisher of Release the Virgins and the collection of essays on science fiction film entitled Jar Jar Binks Must Die.
Hi, my name is Ben Milan. I'm an actor, a writer, and filmmaker. I've acted in quite a few sci-fi projects. I write a screenwrite. I also have a novel I'm working on that's sci-fi based, and I have a short film and a TV series that's sci-fi, mixed with a little bit of horror as well. What else? I love NASA. I'm obsessed with NASA. I even applied to be an astronaut for the Mars program recently and was swiftly rejected, but it was still fun. Yeah, that's about it.
Hi, I'm Jenny Brandt Rankin. I'm a Mensan, and I grew up loving Star Trek and He-Man. I was what most people would call a tomboy, a lot like Arya Stark, but without all the killing. And then in my 20s, I discovered my true love, which is Xena, Warrior Princess. That's definitely my favorite. And someday I will finish my fantasy book that I've been working on for a long time, kind of a sci-fi, fantasy, steampunk hybrid. But all of my 10 books so far are all for academia. They're on topics like education, research, data, that sort of thing. One of my two doctorates is a PhD in education, and that's what I tend to lean on the most. I do a lot of public speaking at conferences that are a lot less colorful than this, more for researchers and whatnot, and I do some teaching as well. I teach a class every year or two at University of Cambridge. It's the postdoc master class for life science students who are just finishing their doctorates, and I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, good afternoon. My name is John Puffin. I'm a professor of history here in San Diego at San Diego State University, where among other things I do teach a class called Star Trek Culture and History. It's a number division history course that explores Star Trek in the context of post-World War II America. I am not a Mensa, so it's a little intimidating being up here. But as you know, I'm the Star Trek expert of sorts apparently, and you know that because I have the correct color. I have the blue science uniform today. No, thank you very much. And I'm glad to be here.
And thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. We're going to start off with a couple of questions for our panelists, and then if we have time, then we will allow for questions from the audience. I'm going to start with, what do you see as the next big technology or scientific innovation of tomorrow that we are reading in sci-fi now? We'll start with Doug. All right, we'll stop with John.
Start with John, okay. Coming from the Star Trek background, I'm going to go with holographic technology. I mean, VR is so big, some of us were talking about it earlier, but again, you're limited to that mask that you got to put on. But I think at some point in the next 20 to 30 years, we'll be able to at least have a full experience of holographic technology. Maybe not the physical touching that you might see in the Star Trek holodeck or something like, but something akin to that. We already know that you have the ability to cast holographic images in that. And I imagine the commercial side of this will make them have an idea of a full immersion experience rather than being stuck to wearing something will generate that technology.
Mine's along the same lines. CGI, Ready Player One obviously has lots of examples. If you saw the most recent Spider-Man movie, I don't want to give anything away, but CGI along those lines, we're already seeing videos where you look at a video of someone doing something and that didn't actually happen because we can already manipulate those things, and we consume information through computer interfaces so much nowadays. So I think there's going to be a lot more along those lines. When I think of a big innovation that really has a big impact on us, I think about discoveries in technology that are adopted on a mass scale as opposed to, just private ops, that sort of thing. And so I think any innovation where you don't have much opposition, like mass inoculation for something where people really want to be saved from a particular virus, or clean water solutions, I think we'll see a lot more of that. And things that can sidestep any legal issues. Like, we get excited about self-driving cars, but how do you, if we're really going to be using those as we sort of picture it, how is the algorithm set? Does the car protect your life primarily, or the life of innocent bystanders? There are a lot of legal questions that have to be answered. So I think the things that really are going to spread quickly are those that get around those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that a little bit, I got to see behind the curtain in for the Jurassic World VR experience. I don't know if you guys have done that, but it's pretty amazing. I was part of that development, not the actual designing, but as an actor, I kind of did some voiceover for it so they could see how it would play out. And just they showed me a lot of cool behind the scenes things, and just to see where we are now and where we were just a few years ago, it could be pretty amazing. I also think that biomimicking technologies are on the forefront now. That I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to start, hopefully, to work with nature more, and incorporating technology with that would be pretty cool. And then I think a few years ago they teleported a photonic molecule to a satellite, right? So teleportation hopefully is on the brink of things soon.
I've been seeing science fiction moving away from the hard sciences, from physics, from blowing things up and making them move fast, more towards the social sciences and social engineering. But I think science is still the real world science is still looking at the hard sciences, and the thing I see coming next is the biological sciences. Genetic modification, prenatal testing preconception testing of biological organisms and changing them, which is a nice rabbit hole to go down, and I won't, but I think that's the science that we're going to be seeing a lot more from in the next 10 to 15 years.
I think the biggest change I saw, well, I see a couple of changes, but I read a dystopian sci-fi novel, I can't get the name right now, and all currency, all transactions done with your phone, and then the police had technology to use your phone to administer electric shocks to you, like tasers you carry yourself. And also, with the punishment also, instead of fines, they would lock your phone, so you could not do any electronic transaction. Basically, you could not participate in society in any way for days or weeks, depending on social infractions. If there's a dystopian novel, infraction would be like speaking up, protesting, etc. And unfortunately, I think that's extremely likely. I think our phones will become a double-edged sword that will do amazing things for us, and they're going to be used against us, not just by hacking and taking our information, but like I said, I think, to block us out from society.
So there's exoskeletons and military applications are also something I think that is really starting to become a reality, as well as for people who are paralyzed and to be able to use that kind of technology. So I feel like that's really going to start developing and becoming more available on a mass scale.
Okay, we'll get the dark question out of the way now. Are you concerned that some of the darker dystopian writings may be in our future?
Very much so. I mean, this is actually happening. In China, they're monitored 24/7. It's a community in China where they get points deducted by the government for things like criticizing the government, which affects their ability to travel and to get loans. They're monitored 24/7, and they're rated by the government for their citizenship. I can't believe that's actually happening. I mean, granted, things like murder and genocide are more spectacular, but that's the death of a human spirit that's happening today. And I think that's the biggest human rights violation. And I think that and so now we have to just basically move forward as a society and say that not only do we value our flesh and blood, we value our spirit and freedom.
I both fear and hope that the dystopias we're seeing in science fiction today are more a reflection of what the authors see or imagine the world to be today rather than what it will be tomorrow. I've always looked at science fiction as something that can both entertain and encourage us to build the future we want to live in. So I hope that the plethora of dystopias I'm reading will simply be encouraging people to not make that the world of tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with that. Sometimes it feels like we're living in the Back to the Future Part 2 alternate 1985 timeline right now. But I hope that we can. I like that they're cautionary tales, hopefully, and that we can learn from them, and that the responsibility of the writers and intellectuals is to present these issues that are going on and say, hey, guys, as a society, we are screwing things up. Let's not end up here. So I hope they're more of a cautionary tale rather than our inevitable future.
Yes, I think there's a lot of truth to them. I think a common theme in dystopian writing is inequity. And there is so much inequity in our world already, and I don't think it'll necessarily look the same like where you have District 12 and other districts living in very blatant subservience to the capital, or you have, Elysium, which is based on, or like an early Star Trek episode where you have the people living on the ravaged Earth, and then up here there's Elysium. I don't think it will be as overt, like, hey, we've accepted that this is how it's supposed to be. Yet at the same time, that's what we see in society. And we already have a division within our countries. We have our country borders that are very heavily guarded. And I can see the world moving more and more towards not just private communities, but I can imagine there actually being private towns, where the rich live and so on. It's very close to that already. I hope that doesn't happen, but I could see that happen. And I also see more money continuing to take a really powerful role in determining things that affect the health and well-being of all of us. But one thing that is also common in dystopian writing is the celebration of heroes, not just heroes who have power, but heroes that don't have anything and say, I'm going to do something about this. And I have a lot of faith in that, and I do believe that more often than not, the real heroes here will prevail.
Following on that, since I'm talking here a little bit more about Star Trek, I mean, obviously there is dystopian episodes in that within Star Trek, but in the end, of course, the greater good always comes, and I think that, that's one of the things I can see going forward. Obviously, I think the most troubling may be environmental, in terms of the kind of dystopian writings that we see as a future, kind of a bleak future. We know with climate change and other things that it is not something that's 100, 200, 300, 400 years in the future. It is within our lifetimes. But again, the dystopian novels and writings and episodes can serve a good purpose, much like utopian ones do, of course, because they also remind us of the things that we want to avoid, and to work towards circumventing them some way. So I'm not as troubled by them or that they're going to come true. I mean, I think there's always going to be some negative or darker side, but I think that society and the world in general has progressed, towards a better existence. And as a historian, I look at it much more long term. And I tell my students, I say, things may be bad, but hey, during the Civil War, 600,000 Americans were killed. So, let's understand and put it in some context. That yes, things may feel darker at one time or another, but overall, the world has seemingly moved in a better place.
Yeah, my sci-fi novel actually talks about utopian and dystopian worlds kind of clashing, so I totally agree with that.
Okay. Why do you believe science fiction is important to us?
So okay. I think it's important because, and I think somebody alluded to it just a few minutes ago, that it helps us imagine a better life, a better place. That otherwise we have to have something to look forward to achieve. Otherwise, we don't progress as human beings. And so, science fiction plays a very important role in helping us imagine something different and get us out of our status quo. So, most nonfiction, even a lot of fiction that's more contemporary, keeps us where we are. It doesn't make us think to the future. So we can look at it, Gene Roddenberry during the 1960s, thinking of Star Trek and placing it 300 or 400 years in the future, of course, but imagining a place where there is no poverty, where there is no race. And if we can imagine it, then we can work towards it. And without that imagination, we're not going to go anywhere.
This is so important. It's that big celebration of what if. And I love that with science fiction, it doesn't just celebrate the dreamer side of science, but also you can tell these writers and artists have really thought things through of how might this actually work. Like if you look back on the sketches of Leonardo da Vinci of flying machines, helicopters, parachutes, things that are now mass-produced and used regularly, there are things that can happen. And I think whether you set science fiction in art or in story, it helps people see possibilities, the good and the bad, the good that can happen and the bad to avoid.
Yeah, I think there's a really important symbiotic relationship between science fiction writing and actual scientists. And like when we'd be celebrating the 50th anniversary of going to the moon, if Jules Verne didn't write From the Earth to the Moon. And I think that the creativity that science fiction writing brings to the table is something that we can feed off of as a society.
You stole my thunder. Actually, science fiction is really important because it puts a roof over my head and puts food on my table. But beyond that, no, science fiction is what inspires people to do science. And scientists are the people who are going to be fixing the world for us, or with us. The people who got us to the moon, the people who grew up reading science fiction, went on to work in science. And those of us who realized we couldn't quite make that impact in science decided to go into science fiction to encourage the next generation. But it's also science fiction is the great thought experiment. Rather than screwing up our planet as we go, we look at science fiction and say, what would happen if we do this? Well, maybe let's not do that. Let's do this other thing instead.
I think science fiction is very important because a lot of the authors, especially in the 60s, are sneaking in education without us noticing it. And I'm sure if you all science fiction readers and consumers realize you're a lot smarter than people who don't read it because of all the education that got snuck past you. And Christopher Stasheff would write about that he would sneak about people who would, in the future, sneaking education and rebellious thought past the censors in these guises. And it took me 10 years after reading about that he was telling me what he was doing as I was doing it. I was like, oh, he's not just doing it, he's doing it himself. So read Christopher Stasheff. And it allows us, I think it should be meant for reading politicians because they think about problems that are coming 20 years ahead of time. Like David Brin wrote about transparency and what's going to happen when corporations and politicians can see every instant of your life. And he said the only way to deal with that, since the genie's out of the bottle, is to make corporations and government be completely transparent in return. And other writers are talking about what's, if you read any, William Gibson, what's going to happen when corporations are more powerful than nation states. Hey, we're here. And 15, 20 years ago, we had a roadmap and a warning. And I think the biggest thing, I think, is universal basic income. 20 years, 30 years ahead, David Brin, other writers were talking about what's going to happen when technology eliminates most jobs. And in those sort of utopian novels, there's a green wage that provides for everybody, so everyone can meet a minimum existence. And there's actually movements now, probably inspired by science fiction, to make sure that happens, called UBI, Universal Basic Income.
Let me just jump on that also. In addition to sneaking in the education, science fiction is also the subversive literature. It's the way we can express things that can't be expressed publicly. And under the Soviet Union, the Strugatskys, Zamyatin, all the science fiction authors were the people who were talking about revolution to the downtrodden citizens of the Soviet Union. It's our way of getting around the censors and getting around those who want to keep us down. Oh, it's just science fiction, we can say to them, while knowing that it's far more important.
Lorraine, we're going to hear from you, your position. You said science is your thing, so.
Science fiction has always been important to me. I know how it's affected my life, and that it encouraged me to want to be an astronaut when I was 8 years old. It encouraged me to want to go out and learn more. It terrified my parents, but once they realized that I was actually learning things, and it made me want to gain more knowledge on specific things. How does a rocket work? How does, and I'm a math person, I'm not a reading person. Mensans are different. We're not great at everything, knowledgeable.
Lies!
We're very diverse. We are the 2% of everything. So some people are into writing, some people are into math, some people have great memories. So we're all very, very different. But for me, it helped me make sense out of math, and I love math. And so I would make problems into science fiction problems. I didn't want to do apples and oranges, I did phasers and communicating. It helped me relate to it a lot better, and it made me want to learn more and to be able to accomplish things, because I could see that in science fiction. So I thought it was really important. And thank you for asking. Okay. Our next question, and then we'll get ready to take some questions from the audience after a couple more questions. Do you believe scientists are reading science fiction, or that sci-fi writers are reading science? Start with you, Doug.
I've been seeing, a lot more science fiction, writers. There's more about the soft, the sociology. And I think science has gotten very complicated. I was a philosophy major, so all you engineering majors can make fun of me. But I remember reading elsewhere that scientists, as a sort of general opinion, felt that there was 11 space dimensions and 2 time dimensions. That was kind of settled science. And I went to my philosophy chair, department chair, and I said, shouldn't that be something we talk about in philosophy, how that impacts our life, that there's 11 dimensions? And he goes, everybody here is a soft major. No one wants to talk about that, Doug. I would get kicked out of the department chair if I made a class about that. And I think that science is somewhat passed by the layman at this point, that we really can't understand the math. We kind of read about the idea, we go about quantum theory, but no one has the math, except for scientists, to really understand it in a useful way.
I thought we just answered that. Are scientists reading science fiction? Of course they are. Are science fiction people reading science? Of course they are. There are so many working scientists who are professional science fiction authors. Greg Benford, Jeff Landis, Catherine Asaro, just 3 off the top of my head. And I know when I started writing science fiction, I read somewhere that you read science news to get the latest in science. That's for us old folk before the internet was everywhere. But as a working science fiction editor, I could tell when certain stories had hit the press when certain science stories had hit the press by the number of science fiction stories coming in talking about them, whatever the arcane topic was. So yeah, there's always been and always will be cross-pollination between science and science fiction, just because they are so intimately related.
Yeah, I 100% agree. As someone, I have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, and then I get a master's degree in industrial engineering. So science is definitely integral part of who I am. But as a storyteller, any role that I play as an actor or anything that I'm writing, obviously the science is heavy, it comes into play there. I feel like maybe prior to the 20th century, maybe the science fiction writers were a little more influencing scientists, but maybe now that we're in this science-based technology society, the actual science is having more of an effect on the science fiction writers. But I think it's a pretty, as I said previously, a symbiotic relationship that it's really important for society.
Yes, I think each inspires the other. I'm a former English teacher, and so I have to quote Shakespeare's Hamlet here. You all know the quote where he says, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." And there's just so much to inspire us. And so I imagine that science fiction writers, they probably start out more with the mainstream consumption science. Some that I love, Mensa Brainwave, you get an email once a week with these snippets of the most fascinating science stories. Another one is feedspot.com Science Alerts. There are titles where you're not even necessarily interested in that type of science, but it's so captivating you just have to read it. And so I imagine they start with that and delve more deeply. Even the book, not my research books, but the one I plug away on my fantasy sci-fi book, I've even delved into Tesla's clumsier work on time travel and some on Einstein's theory of how, a theory actually that was proven recently when they looked at the clocks on orbiting satellites, that time actually travels at different rates depending on the gravitational pull. You'll read these things and it inspires new plot points and inspires entire stories. I think how can a science fiction writer not read that? And then on the flip side, for a scientist, it's just a celebration of your field, and it's a celebration of that whole free dreamer side of what if. So I think both are happening.
Yeah, I think that, if we think about, when Gene Roddenberry was putting together Star Trek back in the 1960s, he reached out to the Rand Corporation, to NASA, because it gives legitimacy to the science fiction too, by going to that real science. Even if it's not yet plausible, but that scientists are thinking about things like that. And on the flip side, we still see that today. I was preparing for this panel, reading about scientists who are still trying to discover and figure out if they can design warp drive and warp bubbles. And they're inspired by Star Trek to do that. They think, man, that's got to be possible, and I'm going to try to figure it out. If it means a new dimension of science or something like that, then we're going to try. Same thing with the transporter you mentioned. This idea of transporting a molecule to a good start. So I think both sides are reading each other and working off each other. And I think even in the science fiction I read, you can tell that they have studied this a little bit of the science, not just the jargon, but they've gone a little bit deeper.
Do you think the guy who invented the first mobile phone, he was inspired by the communicators on Star Trek?
I brought it by the way, so.
Nice. Exactly. We didn't plan that. That just happened.
Exactly. The Motorola flip phones in the 1990s had that flip phone. It's because it reminded him of the communicators.
In 1944, the FBI knocked on the door of the Office of Astounding Science Fiction because they published a story in which radioactive dust was used as a weapon. And John Campbell did not send them to Cleve Cartnell's house. He said, it was obvious from the scientific literature. Why do you think this is an issue? And the FBI told Campbell something, and Campbell said, well, if we retract the story, then the world is going to know that something is actually happening.
All right, time for a little fun question. What item, toy, or ability from science fiction would you most want and why?
That was a tough one. I was thinking about that as a tough one. There's a personal one and there's one for society. So the personal one would be the transporter. I mean, imagine being able to just transport yourself right here and avoid all the traffic and hassle, if nothing else. And again, transporters would save on. It would be the most green thing you could do. We could get rid of carbon fuels and everything else. But I think for long term, I think warp drive. I mean, the idea of being able to be it's almost impossible for us to get to Mars. We'll get there eventually, but it's a long struggle, it's a long trip. Imagine the other stars we could reach if we had the capacity, to go faster than the speed of light in some fashion. So I think that, I think in the long term, I would think warp drive because it would open up all kinds of possibilities for us.
Still my answer.
I would go for personal reasons. I would go for the time machine, H.G. Wells. My dad died 12 years ago, and he was just everything to me. And so I would go back to when he was healthy, before he had Parkinson's, and he loved history and travel and adventure, and I would just go on adventures with him. And for society, we would have to talk. I've been vegan most of my life, so I don't kill, but I would have to think about Leopold II, Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong. I'd have to talk to Daddy about, are we going to do something about these guys? So that would be the society end, but I would love that time machine.
I don't know, time machine, time travel, it's too messy. It's too many different timelines. I feel like it could cause too many disasters. No, I'm all about quantum teleportation, man. That's the thing. I think for society and for personal, I think it'd be great. That's it, that's all I got.
Nancy Kress did it through genetic engineering, and Heinlein did it with pills, but something that would enable me to not need to sleep. I've got way too many things to do and not nearly enough hours in the day.
Have you heard of Mountain Dew?
That's for bikers. I need something good. Jolt.
I have people sweat quantum teleportation and the idea of like these transporters for Star Trek, sorry. But anything that breaks you down into a million pieces and then reassembles you someplace else, I'm pretty sure it kills you along the way and creates a duplicate that has all your memories. And that creates a thing of, if something is exactly like you, has the memories, is it you? And I think no, because the you that was you got killed. And I explored that theory in a book, in a novella I wrote called The Unteleported Mage.
Anyway, Willy Wonka did it, man. Just
Mike TV, yeah.
yeah, Mike TV.
And mine is the transporter.
Yeah, see?
I want to be able to get places fast.
Exactly.
Instead of going through the crowd, you could have just teleported right up here on the panel, ready to go. But I think that would be a lot of fun.